In this video, I'm going to show you how to make sourdough bread out of 100% whole grain spelt flour. Let's do it.
For this recipe, you'll need about a tablespoon or 25 grams of unfed sourdough starter. I just took this starter out of my fridge and it's ready to feed. Pop it on your digital scale and feed it 50 grams of water. Then give that a good stir. And then add 50 grams of whole grain spelt flour. Since we're using 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour, this will be a 100% hydration sourdough starter. Mix everything together until there aren't any dry bits of flour left. I like to push the starter down with a spoon so it's flat. Then mark the top with a rubber band so you can see how much the starter grows. Then allow this to rise in a warm spot overnight, or for about 6 to 8 hours. And 8 hours later, my starter more than doubled in size. It's ready to use. Now it's time to put the ingredients together. So grab your digital scale and a mixing bowl and get ready to mix. And just like the whole wheat sourdough bread that I made, I'm just going to mix all the ingredients together at once. So start with 275 grams of water added right to the bowl. Then add 100 grams of your active sourdough starter. If you fed your starter like mine, you should end up with about 25 grams of sourdough starter left over. I just pop the lid back on and store that in my fridge for next time I'm ready to bake. Stir the water and the starter together until it becomes a little bit milky. Like that. Then add 10 grams of salt. Then the last ingredient you'll need is the flour. Mix in 450 grams of whole grain spelt flour. Now that the ingredients are in the bowl, it's time to mix everything together. So grab your dough scraper, bowl scraper, whatever you got. Mix everything together until there aren't really any dry bits of flour left. Now this might seem like a really dry dough, and at 65% hydration, it is pretty dry. And you might be tempted to up the hydration like other whole grain breads, but I recommend keeping it at 65% hydration. Don't add any more water if you don't have to. There are two main reasons that I put less water in this recipe than my regular whole wheat sourdough bread. The first reason is that spelt flour makes a really extensible or stretchy dough, and the second reason is that spelt flour makes a dough that ferments rather quickly. So if you lower the hydration a little bit, the dough will be a lot easier to handle on both of these accounts. But that does mean you'll need to work a little bit harder to get all the flour incorporated into the water. Just keep working the flour, working the dough in the bowl. You can even knead it a little bit with your hands. The resulting dough will be really easy to handle and you'll be glad you put in the extra work. Spin it around the bowl a few times just to pick up some extra bits of flour that are still clinging to the side of the bowl. Then cover up the dough with a kitchen towel or a linen and let it sit on your counter and rest for 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, it's time to do the first stretch and fold. So go ahead and grab a corner of your dough, pull it up and over the center, then take the next edge of the dough and pull it up and pull it over the center. Keep going around the dough a few times until you have a nice tight ball of dough. Cover the dough up again and let it rest for another 30 minutes. A half hour later, it's time for the second set of stretch and folds. Your dough is a little bit more puffy now, so be a little bit more gentle. And let it rest again for 30 minutes. And a half hour later, it's time for the last set of stretch and folds. The dough should feel pretty smooth by now and should have puffed up even more. Now this step is optional, but I'm gonna move my dough to an oiled bowl where it can finish bulk fermenting for a few more hours. So I'm taking it out of the bowl, just kind of rounding it out with my hands. Spray a bowl with some vegetable oil. And then transfer the dough into the bowl. Cover the dough up and let it continue rising for about 3 more hours. If your kitchen's pretty cold, you can move it to a warm area, like inside your oven, with the light turned on. Then 3 hours later, your dough should have risen and should be nice and puffy. You can see that my dough got a little bit dry and formed a skin on the outside. I'm just going to be careful to make sure that that skin stays on the outside and I don't fold it into the dough when I'm shaping. Now it's time to pre-shape the dough. I'm going to pre-shape into a round or a boule shape. I'm just going to take each of the 4 corners of the dough, fold them over the center, then flip the dough over. Then I'll smooth out the edges with my hands and with the bench scraper until I've got a nice tight ball of dough. Once you pre-shape the dough into a ball, cover it up on your counter and let it rest for about 30 minutes. And 30 minutes later, it's time to give the dough its final shape. I'm going to be using this round Banneton basket that I've dusted with rice flour, so I need to shape my dough into a boule or a round. And this will basically be the same process as the pre-shape. Fold in the 4 corners, flip the dough over, then cup and pull the dough with your hands against the counter to round out the edges. Then once the dough is shaped into a ball, you can flip the dough over upside down into the Banneton basket. Just make sure that the smooth side is on the bottom and the seam side is on the top. Stitch the dough up a little bit on the seam, and then move this dough directly into the fridge where it can proof overnight in a cold environment. Then the next day when you're ready to bake, preheat your oven with the Dutch oven inside to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. When your oven is hot and ready to bake, grab a piece of parchment paper that's a little bit bigger than your dough. Oops. There we go. Then take your dough out of the fridge and flip it carefully over onto the parchment paper. Dust off any excess flour that's on the top of the dough with your hand or a tiny brush. This tiny brush came with my Banneton basket when I bought it. Pretty cool. Now it's time to score the dough. I'm just going to use a razor blade and score a simple cross pattern on the top of my dough. But feel free to be as creative as you want in the scoring. Score whatever you want and share it with me at Grant_Bakes on Instagram. Once you've scored your dough, go ahead and grab both ends of the parchment paper and just transfer this into your hot Dutch oven. Pop the Dutch oven lid on and bake this at 500 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, take off the Dutch oven lid and admire your oven spring. This bread opened up pretty nicely along those score marks. Then bake this for an additional 15 minutes with the lid off this time. 15 minutes later, your bread should look something like this. Make sure to let your bread cool for at least an hour before you cut into it. I am really pleased with how this bread turned out. For a 100% spelt loaf of bread, this looks a lot like my regular sourdough bread from the outside. It held its shape nicely, it puffed up in the oven, it's got a nice design, and even on the inside it looks great. It's got a great crisp crust on the outside, a soft interior crumb, and the flavor is amazing. Perfect for toast, perfect for a healthy, hearty sandwich. If you're looking to incorporate more whole grains into your sourdough baking, definitely give this 100% whole grain spelt sourdough bread a try. And if you want to learn how to make better bread, sourdough, and pizza at home, hit the subscribe button. I've got new videos every single week. I'll see you in the next video.